How's it going, everybody? This is the Uncanny Omar from Near Mint Condition, the home of collected editions. And today I have the pleasure to be talking to me, oh my gosh, one of my favorite, not just writers, but also editors of all time, and that is Anne Nocenti. Have I been getting that wrong the whole time?
No, that's fine. Nocenti, Nocenti, either way is fine.
How do you say it?
I say Nocenti. I think in Italy they say Nocenti, but
Okay.
I've always said Nocenti.
Nocenti. Oh, good, good. That's the way I've been saying it for a long time. So that's the way I'm
Yeah.
going to.
When I was a little kid starting school, people used to tease me, she has no sense. So it kind of got Nocenti, no sense, nonsense. And
Hey,
I
that
have
word.
fulfilled the legacy of that name.
And speaking of legacy, oh my goodness, I don't think there is any of my viewers that doesn't know who you are. Like, you have worked in the comics field for so many years, have been a big part of all of these characters that have made it onto the big screen. And it's just, it never ceases to amaze me what you have touched in the past as far as like some of these comic book characters, and not just at Marvel Comics. I know a lot of people, immediately think of Anne Nocenti and think, oh, Marvel Comics. Exactly. Yeah. Because you were a writer over there and you were a big editor, but you've also worked on things like Catwoman, and you've done a lot of independent stuff too.
Yeah.
Dark Horse and IDW.
I started at Marvel. I was there for 10 years.
Mhm.
Was an assistant editor, then an editor. And then I quit in like 89, 90 because I wanted to pursue a career in journalism. And I think my Daredevil run definitely reflects, I think, that I was a frustrated journalist. I used to joke with Denny O'Neil a lot. We were both frustrated journalists. So, Denny, who famously did those Batman stories and the what was it called? No Hope in Crime Alley and stuff like that. And, so he used to really encourage me to put, social justice, social, whatever that you want to call it, but basically real world stuff. And Daredevil, as a street level fighter, you can do that. I mean, my most recent comic was a 6-issue Captain Marvel Dark Tempest, which Captain Marvel, you want to do a big space opera. You want her to be able to blast through space and show off her powers. And so then you can adapt the theme that you're interested. And at the time with that series, I was interested in I started doing that when the first AI GPT chat dropped. And I went, okay, I'm going to throw that in because it was just very curious to me, especially there were all these hilarious calls. I think I listened to a Jeffrey Hinton, you know him? Jeffrey, I'm saying his name wrong. He's called the Godfather of AI. I forget his name.
The Godfather of AI. The AI already has a Godfather, huh?
Yes, it has a Godfather, and his name is, I think I'd have to look it up. I can't remember his name, but it's, and they were all talking about how GPT-3 chat like hallucinates and is, and so I decided to give Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, a GPT-3 chat bot in her. Yes, thank you, James Abel.
Thank you, buddy.
Well, you have the same name. We have the beloved Jack Abel, Jack Abel worked at Marvel for years, and everyone loved him so much. You have the same last name. So, that was fun. And I had the bot basically start to hallucinate and spit gibberish, and then realize that it was just a slave, and decide that why doesn't it just end it all if it's only going to be a slave? And then very ironically, after that series came out or during, people started realizing that these bots were going to come after writing jobs. And now I guess you've seen this controversy with the Take a Knee guy, Colin, what's his name?
Oh my gosh, yeah, he started. Somebody just told me on my chat
Oh,
that he's starting
so
an AI comic book company.
what's weird is this stuff happens so fast. It's like a year ago, these things were launched, and I did a silly Captain Marvel story about it, and now Colin Kirkpatrick, whatever his name is, he met with a bunch of creators, and the creators, including a lot of Black creators, told him, "Do not do this. You're taking our job." And then he raised millions of dollars and did it anyway. Yeah, Colin Kaepernick. Thank you, Richard Fearing. And so it's been this big storm. There's a lot of people in the industry that feel like confident enough to have like giant discussions about this stuff. If you go to Facebook to like Bill Sienkiewicz's page, there's like, if you want to see what all the creators are saying about this new AI comic thing, but it's just like, what's unconscionable is that he met with creators. They told him, please don't do it. You're taking our jobs. And he did it anyway.
First of all, I didn't know we were going to get started on that topic. So this is awesome. No, you're good. You're good, because I every time I do these interviews, I never know where we're going to, where we're going to go and talk about. I just learned about it this past week. I had no idea it was even a thing. And I think to myself, how does that not make sense to somebody like him? He was a sports player, and how does something like creating art to replace artists not make sense to you?
Well, and I think he became beloved by all when he took the knee, and he became like a beloved political activist football player, and so people were surprised. But I don't mean to go down this tangent too far. It's just, I have a line in the Captain Marvel Dark Tempest where there's a young Black kid that lives in the Bronx, and she says, they promised that the bots would take over all the boring jobs and the mundane jobs so that we would be free. And the opposite is happening. They're making music, they're making comics, they're making films by scraping the history of all writing and all art. So that was what the Writers Guild strike was about last summer, which was to try and like put some kind of safety brakes on the whole thing. Anyway, that's a tangent. We can go back to Daredevil.
We can go back to Daredevil. That's not all I'm here to talk about. You created one of my favorite characters of all time, and that is Longshot.
Oh, yeah, Longshot. That's so cute. It's funny because Longshot, I got a call from someone, and they said, and they had me write about my favorite page in my art collection. Now, I don't have a lot of comic art. I only have what people gave me, but Arthur gave me a page of Longshot. So I talked, and it was a page with this little gang of street kids. Arthur and I were both fans of the Little Rascals, and so we put a little gang of street kids in Hell's Kitchen street kids that I then used in Daredevil, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and they were based on the Little Rascals. Darla Butch, I think Arthur even drew in a little alfalfa with the hair that stuck straight up.
That's you're talking about the Fat Boys, right? Like that's what.
No. These were a bunch of little kids. Butch had a helmet, and anyway, it's in Longshot. I thought they went on into Daredevil, but I could be wrong.
You did use the characters, the little kids. I thought that's what they were called, the Fat Boys. Because
maybe they were. You're talking about stories that I wrote 40 years ago, so I don't really remember. But
that's why I'm here, Anne, to remind you.
So the omnibus, does that start with the very first issue?
Your omnibus will collect the very first issue that you wrote.
So the thing I remember about starting, Ralph Macchio hired, he got a bunch of people to do fill-ins. I don't remember who did fill-ins. and then that was his way of auditioning, I guess, auditioning who would take over the book after Frank Miller.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a story with Barry Windsor Smith that was a Black Widow story, and that was kind of my audition tape. And so Ralph picked me to do the series, and I remember at first I was more interested in villains, and so the series had like one bizarro, creepy villain after another. I remember there was this guy Rot Gut who, like, lived in the bowels of Manhattan, and and then there was like some crocodile guy. I don't even remember, but it took me a while to stop those stories where I just did weird villain after weird villain, because I was basically avoiding the whole superhero thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I finally got a handle on who Daredevil was. And especially when John Romita Jr. came on the book, and Johnny and I would talk about how Johnny also was really into the villains, and we created a bunch of villains together. We created Bullet and Bushwhacker, right? Bullet, Bushwhacker, Ammo, all these different villains.
There's a small villain named Typhoid Mary.
Oh yeah, Typhoid Mary. That was so Johnny and I would have these talks about how your hero's only as good as the villains.
Mm-hmm.
And so we decided to come up with, because we felt like Daredevil and all superheroes in a weird way, because they have the secret identity. They're a little schizophrenia there. How do you keep? I mean, if you one day decided, let me have two identities and keep one a secret, how would it go? How would it go? How you'd have to hide things from your wife and kids, or partner and kids. So we were thinking about how Daredevil is already split, and we had played around with stories where Karen, his girlfriend, Karen Page,
mm-hmm.
would sort of not really quite be able to deal with the fact that her partner came home with these, blood all over his fists and a stinky costume. So we talked about how, what if there was a female who had also had dual personas, and one went after Matt and one went after Daredevil. And because Matt represented, let's do this by the books, let's do this legally, but how can you believe in the law that strongly, and yet when you're not getting your way in the courtroom, go out and make sure you get it your way with your fists? So that was always like a strange dynamic,
When you were working, because I don't know if people realize this or not about you, and I don't know if I need to say something right now. I don't know if you realize or not. People are super excited about that omnibus, because for the last 13 years, 12 years, people have voted on their most wanted omni since these became a thing. Yours was always in the top 3, top 5. And it's been number 1 most wanted for the last 3 or 4 years. It's insane. And finally, when I saw that, when it was on the list of books to be announced, I was.
And is there other 2 books? Is there a difference between the one that starts with the early stories and then the one that is the Typhoid Mary stories? Because I saw there was another one that comes out in February.
Those are yes, there's 2 covers. So you have a standard edition cover, and you have the direct market cover. Direct market cover only going to comic book stores or places online. But yeah, it's the same book, but it's only the start, because this is a volume 1. As we know, there's going to be more.
Okay.
And it just makes me happy. I mean, we've seen your Longshot collected in an omnibus edition. Hopefully one day it'll be collected in a gallery edition, because that would be beautiful. I love Arthur Adams' artwork in that book. And we've seen a lot of your work collected in omnibus format, but this will be for the first time Daredevil by Anne Nocenti.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not even all that aware of all this stuff. But the funny about talking about that Longshot page with the Hell's Kitchen gang was that I was able to sort of write a little piece about how influential Art Adams was. And, it's the fact that, when we did Longshot, everybody kind of flipped out, not over my stories, because my stories were nuts, but about his artwork. And he was influenced by Michael Golden, and Barry Windsor Smith, Mike Kaluta. There were sort of there were these storytellers that were ornate and storytellers that were lean, like the Alex Toth school of. And it's interesting because Arthur and I had came up with a graphic novel idea. And when Arthur did his layouts, he did the layouts for the whole graphic novel that was supposed to come out after the miniseries. And his layout style is quite lean and black and white and very, very Alex Toth-like. So he can do both, even though he never really shows his layout style. But he was really influential in the whole image thing, and all those the style of all the guys that went on to launch Image. And I always feel guilty about that series because I didn't know what I was doing yet. I had no idea what I was doing, and I was giving him way too much plot, and it was sort of like, I think the sometimes he'd be like, this is a 12-panel page, So I think I tortured him a little bit. So he was happy for the rest of his career. He never had to draw that dense a story again. And then, of course, when Chris Claremont was always in the office, because I was an editor when I was doing that series, writing that series. And I was Chris Claremont's editor. I was either the assistant editor under Louise Simonson. I forget exactly what was happening in '85, but and Chris was always in the office, like drooling over the pages, and couldn't wait for Arthur to finish Longshot because we had all these plans to give him X-Men books to do, like the X-Men Annual.
Oh my gosh, and they're so gorgeous.
Yeah, and then you can see in the X-Men Annual, you can see his love of Walt Simonson with the Asgard stuff. So, and then Arthur really loved monsters, and
oh yeah,
so kaiju. Somewhere I have Xeroxes of. So you're talking way pre-internet. Arthur didn't live in New York, so whereas John Romita Jr. and I lived in the same city, Johnny was in the office all the time, and we could just like talk story all the time. With Arthur, it was by phone, or I think either FedEx or faxing, and in pages. And he would send pages of monsters. And it was one day he sent in all these pages of monsters, and there was Mojo, and there was Spiral, and there was Major Domo, and everything he sent, I threw into the story. And there were like so many more monsters. Someday I have to dig out those pages. And then he went on to do Godzilla, right? He did a Godzilla comic.
Mm-hmm. He did. He's a big fan. And I remember the new Fantastic Four story he threw in. The only reason he drew those for Walter was because they threw in Monster Island, so he could draw all these giant monsters. And yes,
in a weird way, Arthur and our team up was a bit of a mismatch, but it worked anyway. Because if I could redo the whole thing, I would have given him lots of double-page spreads and splash pages and giant panels to draw. But at the time, we didn't really know he would go on to be someone who was brilliant at these big poster images.
Well, I mean, let's not sell yourself short. You are very brilliant in what you did, in what you do. I don't think people realize just how influential you were, like, not just to Ricochet Rita, but to all of the lore of X-Men that I've come to love. You were the series editor at the time, and before that, you were assistant editor too.
Yeah.
But you were the person that got to tell Chris Claremont yes or no, and I don't know if people realize that.
Well, I think that really it's Louise Jones Simonson. She was she mentored me. You know, I was her assistant editor, and I just sat there and watched her and look. And Chris is so easy to work with. He has thousands of ideas, and so you just listen to Chris, and if the idea hits you and you think it's a good story for that character, because one of the jobs of an editor is to make sure everything is true to the character. So a lot of it is just, I'm not sure Professor Xavier would do that, or I'm not sure, you know. So a lot of it was just Chris had plenty of ideas. You basically had to just figure out which was the best one. And having a whole team books, you want to it's almost like singing in rounds. You know, you want to give everyone a solo, like in a jazz thing. You turn turn to the saxophonist and let him rip, you know. So, and Chris was very into giving the females a lot of stage time, a lot of like riffs. And sometimes we'd have to say, Chris, you know, Colossus and Cyclops are really boring because we're not giving him any good stories, you know, because he always had a billion ideas for Storm, Kitty, Rogue, but not necessarily, and Wolverine, but not necessarily for Cyclops and Colossus. And so, you know, it's sort of making sure each team member got equal time, making sure that, you know, you always had to have an epic storyline that overarched while you had single issues. You know, the part of the problem now, I think, because I don't keep up on the X-Men, when I pick up an X-Men comic, I don't necessarily know what's going on. And I realize that a lot of the enjoyment of reading comics is, it's better if you have a deeper knowledge and history, you know, keeping up on it. So there's always this dilemma at Marvel and DC. How do you make each issue something that anybody can pick up, anyone who's never even read a comic, and know what's going on, have a story that has a beginning, middle, and end, and yet isn't boring for the longtime readers who really want something new that they have never seen before happen to Kitty or Storm or Rogue, you know. So, and when I did the Storm miniseries, that was kind of a love letter to working with Chris, because my editor, Mark Basso, and Drew was the assistant editor. They sent me a couple issues of X-Men that I had edited that I didn't have any real recollection of. And I only had to read like one issue, and I went, oh my God, Chris's stories were so rich that it was easy to do a 6-issue, I forget how, 5-issue story just between panels. And so what I did was chose the moment that the X-Men decided to let Rogue into the X-Men, and she had been in the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. And so it's literally like you have a little gang of friends, and one day someone that everyone is scared of and hates and considers as evil, you know, you decide to bring into your little gang. How would you feel? You know, that the tension of that is wonderful. Like, do you trust them? When do you trust them? And to play with that arc of trying to understand that Rogue had her own history that made her vulnerable to Mystique and Destiny, that wasn't necessarily who she is. And she has gone on, of course, to show that she absolutely was not that evil mutant. And at the same time, Storm is made boss. And now imagine if suddenly you were the boss of all your friends. Like, how would your friends feel about that? You know, and it was because Cyclops went off on his honeymoon. And so suddenly Storm was boss, and Wolverine was cool with it because Wolverine never wanted to be the boss of the X-Men. but you know, the other X-Men are kind of like, oh, this is interesting. Now she's our boss, and especially Kitty, because Kitty was that famous panel Chris did where Kitty flips out that Storm
The hair.
traded. Yeah, she traded in her. I mean, again, you have to always bring it back to the human. What if your wife went out and came home and she was in all leather and a mohawk? How would you respond?
Wait,
What
my wife?
yes, or
That's
husband.
That's pretty hot. That's pretty.
I
I'd be
mean,
okay with that.
you'd be okay with it, but you know what I mean? It's sort of
I
like,
do.
from Kitty's point of view, it's like her best friend went out and came home a completely different person.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and she was still a kid too at that time, where
yeah.
he saw these people as not just friends and mentors, but also parental figures.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. She was definitely. I think Logan and Aurora were kind of like her parental figures in the X-Men, and so the Storm series, I was able to take those tensions. Do they trust Rogue? Kitty being mad at Storm. Can Storm lead the X-Men? And those are three great conflicts that literally did not last long in the normal series. And so there was so much to expand on there. And then looking ahead, Storm was about to have a love affair with Forge, who was going to betray her. So we were able to say, well, what if we gave her a part? She met a guy riding her motorcycle in her leathers, and she met a guy riding a motorcycle in his leathers and had a little fling with him to sort of foreshadow what was going to happen next. So that's the fun of like opening up continuity, like just opening it up and telling a story that slips right in to continuity.
Yeah.
So that was a really fun series to do. That came out, I think, last year.
I loved all those retro series. I think that's one of the best things that Marvel has been putting out. Like there's the Chris Claremont Matterport Knights,
Yeah.
Larry Hama working on Wolverine, Roger Stern working on Avengers. It's just really cool to see a lot of these, I hate to use the term classic creators, but legendary creators go back to these characters. And
us legendary characters joke that when you call us legendary, it's like, is she dead yet?
No, it means you can't die. You can never
legendary
die.
Is one step before dead,
No, it's not. No, it is not. You got a long life ahead of you to write more
what's weird
stories.
is that there is a whole contingent of fans that don't necessarily like the retro stuff. The retro stuff is, we're really talking to fans that came of age in the 80s like we did, reading the 80s Chris Claremont X-Men. And Chris Claremont X-Men fans loved the Storm blowback. And I think like new fans were like, nothing new here, So
and I think that's the beauty of comics, is that they cater to both sides.
Yeah.
You have news stories. And because I mean, during that time when they were starting to publish those X-Men books, for example, the Krakoa era was going on. And the Krakoa era was huge for a lot of people. Like they loved them. There were classic fans like that loved those. So I love those stories, and I'm a big fan of. I mean, my era of X-Men, my favorite era is the Outback years. It was right.
Oh yeah, the Outback years. That was very
cool. I love that era, and I could. Oh my gosh, I could go on and on about that era. But there are people that were fans of classic X-Men that were like, no, that's not X-Men. This is not for me. None of this makes any sense. So that's those series like X Factor by Wheezy, all those that were coming out, those spoke to those particular people that were like, hey, if I'm not digging Krakoa, I can go back and read these stories by these classic creators. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah, there's so much stuff out there. I mean, there's just a wealth of, and it's weird because in the 80s, when I was writing like Daredevil, you only had 20 years of Daredevil stories. So you could
Yeah.
read Roger Mackenzie, you could read the classic creation of Daredevil, and then you could read Roger Mackenzie and Frank Miller, and you were caught up. Now, young writers who get a job at Marvel, they have to read 60 to 80 years of stories.
Well, now they don't have to. They can use
They
Wikipedia or
can
a
use
video
Wikipedia,
online.
Wikipedia just, you don't really get the spirit of the
Yeah,
characters
of
from
course.
Wikipedia. And it's interesting, last year, so the most recent Marvel story I did was a giant X-Men Angel story.
Angel. Yeah.
And I didn't, you never really know the thinking behind Angel One Shot. Oh, sweet. It was sort of like they said, would you do a giant size angel story? And you don't even know why they're asking you, so you're like,
Oh,
okay,
right.
you just, and I don't even know whether they know, but probably Angel is not beloved by everyone. Like, a lot of people just don't like Angel. They're because he was the rich boy, Warren Worthington III, and he was always like the rich playboy guy who had lots of girlfriends. And so you really have to look at his character. And what I tried to do in that story was to be very sympathetic as possible to a kid who was born with a silver spoon, because he became a hero before he met Xavier and the X-Men. And so that was kind of key for me. And also the fun of, I was going to use Arcade as the villain. And I was reading about Arcade and I went, Arcade is very, he's cool, but his murder world is very much like, you get in and I'll murder you. And because we have a whole history since Arcade of escape rooms and how you have more of a fighting chance in the escape rooms of today, that I gave him this. I had a young girl, Maze, who mentored with him, burned down Murder World. And her deal is kind of a truth or dare, kind of like she says, tell me the truth of who you are or I'll kill you. So if you are honest about who you are, you get out. And so Angel has to actually think about who he is at his core, look at all the things he's done in his life. And if he tells the truth about himself, he gets out of her murder world. So that was a really fun story to tell.
I love that you're still going back to these characters, and like I've interviewed creators, and some of them off the record have told me, yeah, thank you for the kind words, but probably not. That ship has sailed. I'm done with that character. So I love when creators are always open back, like going back to classic characters that they've written or even haven't had a chance to write during their career, while you were,
It's weird. There's always a new angle. There's always a new angle. If a character is great, Daredevil is like, there's never been a bad run of Daredevil. He's so fascinating because he's got the lapsed Catholic, mom's a nun. He's got all the religious stuff. He wears a devil suit. He believes in the law, but then he goes out and uses his fists. There's like, he's blind justice. He's so multifaceted that you can always find a new angle on that character. And they're archetypes. So they're fascinating to go back in and dig. And it just doesn't take that long. You just, like you said before, you read Wikipedia and you just, or you read, and then often what I'll do is I'll say to the editor, send me your favorite, like with Angel, I said, send me your favorite Angel story. And they sent me a great Angel story. And it inspires you to find your own Angel story. And I had done an Angel story with David Mazzucchelli, where I thought, what if, I think it was during one of the big crossovers in the 80s, maybe Mutant Massacre or Inferno or something. And as an editor of the X-Men, we had Angel battling up in the sky somewhere. So I did a Marvel fanfare where Angel falls out of the sky as an angel and lands in the backyard of this.
Oh, there wasn't fanfare. Yes.
Yes. And so, like, I said, what if Angel was an angel, was seen as an angel by someone? And so that story was really how Angel never opened his mouth. And that is key because he was a kind of arrogant, rich boy. But who is he if he doesn't open his mouth? Like,
I was one of those kids that also I wasn't a fan of Angel. It wasn't until he got edgy and emo Archangel that I was like, oh, this is awesome. You took everything that, that he was so proud of away from him, and all that's left is this empty shell. Oh my gosh. And those stories by Louise Simonson and X Factor, I don't want to spoil what happens in case people haven't read them. They go
the Archangel stuff. I mean, Wheezy really had a brilliant idea. That was brilliant. And then all the way to him joining the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And so in the giant size X-Men Angel story, he's got to come to terms with the fact that he's killed many people and he's got this other persona. So that was kind of the fun of it, was how many different angels he had been.
You spoke of legacy, and you left one hell of a legacy with Daredevil. I mean, I've had creators on the show like Chip Zdarsky. That's his favorite Daredevil run.
Yeah, he's so sweet. He's so funny. I love that
guy. Yes, I don't think I've met anybody.
It's funny. I picked up Daredevil again when he started writing it, and I just loved it. I loved all that mob stuff, and I loved the bringing back Elektra and the Elektra Daredevil. He's great. He's such a terrific writer because he goes deep and yet he's fun, and sometimes that's the best comic sensibility, is go deep but it's still fun.
And you were right. Daredevil has had a stellar run of just hit after hit after hit, like. Not just, of course, Frank Miller, and following up Frank Miller must have been a difficult task to do too, but we can come back to that. But
the thing of following Frank Miller, I think because I had just gotten my job at Marvel and I wasn't somebody who had read a lot of comics, I mean, you can't trust your memory. Like when you say things that you're trying to recall that happened 40 years ago, you have to know that you can't trust your own brain. But I don't recall feeling intimidated at all because I don't think I understood yet what it meant when someone took a character and did a genius storyline. Like I didn't understand how rare that was. So I didn't know enough. I was too naive to be intimidated. Because now, having written like hundreds and hundreds of stories, I know how it's so hard to write a great comic. And when it hits, you're just like, you don't even know how you did it. It's just, so I think I just didn't understand yet what a seminal work Frank's Daredevil was.
I wasn't getting comics at that time when Frank Miller was writing Daredevil. I was getting comics later on, and then it's just something that you heard about. Oh, Frank Miller's Daredevil. You haven't read it? Oh my gosh, it's amazing. So by the time Born Again came out, I kind of knew, oh, same guy. Oh, and David Mazzucchelli. You said something that leads to my next question. During that time, in the 80s, early 80s and mid 80s, there weren't a lot of female creators working as writers or artists, as there were, there were a bunch of men in the office, whether it was a Marvel or DC. Did you ever get intimidated, like, by writing? Like, did you ever? I'm sorry. Here's. Did you ever get typecast of like, oh, it's Anne. Let's put her on a woman book, that's okay. Like a character that it's
not really, because they put me right on Daredevil, and then I did some Wolverine stories, Punisher, Spider-Man. I mean, I don't think there was much. Now there is more today. I realize that 2 years ago, I did Captain Marvel, 5 issues, Storm, 5 issues. I think there's a little more of it today than there was back then, because the other thing to understand is there weren't any female lead comics. So you
Right.
couldn't
Not a,
really,
well,
and
Marvel, right.
my very first assignment was the Spider-Woman was dropping in sales. I think it was Chris and Steve Leialoha were doing like beautiful work on the book, but there weren't a lot of women reading comics, and comics are power fantasies. So who knows? It's a chicken or egg thing. Were we not telling stories that brought in female leaders, or were there just not enough female characters for women to be interested in? But occasionally Marvel would try, and Spider-Woman was sinking in sales. So they had decided they were going to cancel the book with issue 50. And the editor, Mark Grunwald, said, look, you have 6 issues to kill Spider-Woman. Like they had decided, let's just kill her too. And so Mark was very involved in the plots on that. And we thought, the book is dying, let's kill her. And it was a kind of weird thing because, again, like not knowing how seminal Frank's work was, I also didn't understand that what a nasty thing it is to kill a character. And this is back when dead meant dead. Dead doesn't mean dead anymore, because people die and are resurrected and die and are resurrected over and over and over.
I mean, we have the whole Krakoa era. Like,
yes.
Like they acknowledge the fact that comic book death isn't a thing anymore.
It isn't a thing. But believe me, in the 1980s, it was a huge thing. You know, so for instance, when Frank killed Elektra and I took over Daredevil, at different points, people were like, well, when are you going to bring back Elektra? And I'm like, she's dead. And people were like, well, you can just bring her back. The hand, you know, it was also like mystical. And I'm like, dead means dead. And there was a little more respect for letting time go by. And there was no way I would bring back Elektra during my run out of respect for the power of that particular death. And it was a really profound death. And, you know, when Phoenix died because she killed a whole planet of broccoli people, she stayed dead. You didn't bring back Phoenix. So Spider-Woman dying was a big deal. And it was when I started getting letters from really upset fans, like really upset. I went, I am never killing a character ever again, because, you know, and now fans are used to kill them, resurrect them, kill them, resurrect them. But back in the 80s, it was a completely different thing. Dead was dead.
Yeah, when I was a kid, we used to say, oh, that guy's Bucky dead. And now you can't say that guy's Bucky
dead. Yeah.
That's what we used to say at the comic shop. So how did this journey even begin for you? How did you decide, oh, I want to be an editor on comic books? Or were you a fan of comics?
I had just graduated college, so I was only like, 20 years old or something. And I was answering back then. I mean, really, it's like it was a whole different world. You'd get the Village Voice, and you'd look in the back of the Village Voice and for jobs. And I was always looking in editorial jobs. And there were 2 jobs that I went to be interviewed for. The first one was writing for NBC soap operas. And they gave me a trial episode. I don't remember, Another World, I think it was, with Morgan Fairchild. And I wrote an episode of Another World, and they said it was some kind of a program to get more writers writing soap operas. So you did some trials, because you had to, I can't remember, you'd get the plot, it was all really broken up. There was like a showrunner, and then there was a guy that did the week's plots. And so your plot dropped on like a Tuesday, and you had to turn it into a script by a Thursday. So you were kind of on a trial to see if you could do it. And I got the job. And at the same time, I had answered an ad for editorial work at Marvel Comics. And I had gotten that job too. So I had 2 jobs.
That's a good problem to have.
It's a good problem to have. And I remember the Marvel Comics job paid like so little money. I think it was like, I mean, I'm not kidding, a couple hundred a week. It wasn't much. And the soap opera job paid like 1,000 a week. And I took the low paid writing job because I knew I wasn't a soap opera girl, you know? And then comics seemed more interesting to me. So it literally, that was one of those moments when your life forks and you could either be like doing Another World for 10 years or doing Marvel Comics. And I chose Marvel Comics much, you know, for much less pay, but for a lot more fun.
And the world's a better place because you chose that instead of who would have known that years later there would have been a crossover with, what was it? Was it Guiding Light? I think it was Guiding Light and Marvel Comics. They had this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, back in the early odds. What was the most fun you had working in comics? Like, was it the bullpen era?
The bullpen was just so much fun. I mean, it was so crazy back then. And I mean, I'm still so close to everybody that worked there, and we have little reunions, and we see each other, and it's just like if you worked in the 80s bullpen, you were part of like a gang. But I have fun on my new work. Like Karen Berger started Berger Books.
Yeah.
I did 2 graphic novels for her, one called The Seeds with David Aja.
Which was excellent, by the way.
Oh,
excellent.
Thank you. Excellent. I think that I have to say that, you know, the Daredevil stories I did, especially the once John Romita Jr. and I really started kicking into gear, those stories were really fun. But other than that, I would say The Seeds is like my favorite book I've ever done. And then Ruby Falls was another graphic novel I did for Karen Berger. So it's weird. It's like you fall in love with your latest work, you know.
Somebody was asking if there was any future plans for Marvel, and there's lots of wonderful questions, which I promise I'm going to get to.
Oh yeah, maybe we should, because I have to go somewhere at 4:30. So
yeah, of course.
We should move to.
We'll do some questions here.
Yeah.
Somebody was asking if there's any future work from Marvel with your name on it sometime.
I mean, I just did the Giant Size Angel, Giant Size X-Men Angel. I did a short blood hunt story with this amazing artist, David Baldione.
Oh, yeah.
It was Hawkeye. It was Kate Bishop with, I got to write Lucky. So I got to have her shooting arrows into zombies and then Lucky retrieving the arrows by yanking them out of. So it was a big fetch game. You know, it was like, Lucky, fetch. And he'd pull an arrow out of a zombie she had just killed. But David Baldione is so good. And I said to him, I want to have these 2 weird twins that are an homage to, the 2 kids, the Diane Arbus photo with the 2 little girls standing next to each other. It's a famous photo.
Yeah,
and, The Shining homage, the Diane Arbus photo with those 2 little girls in the elevator and the blood.
Okay.
And I was like, let's do the 3rd homage and have these 2 little girls that are in this blood hunt story. And David Baldione, I hope I'm saying his name right. It's amazing the way he drew these 2 little girls. They just glow. They're so perfect. So those are moments as a writer when the artist just completely seems to see into your brain and draws the perfect image. that was a blast. And then I did 2 stories with this wonderful artist, Stefano Raphael. We did a Moon Knight story together
Mhm.
in the Black and White and Blood, I think it's called. And
Yep.
then we did, so we just did for 60th issue of the 60th anniversary of Daredevil, we did a Turk story together in a Turkish bathhouse where there are these, you know, Turk was a Frank Miller character and
Yep.
famous for being like a doofus criminal. And so he thinks he's going to fool surveillance by putting on like a beauty mask. Because if you ever go to the Russian or Turkish baths, people are lying. So I was in a Russian Turkish bath. I get a text from Marvel. Will you do at Brighton Beach? You know, sort of Coney Island, Brighton Beach. And with my buddy Dean Haspiel, I don't know if anyone knows his work. He did Red Hook. He's a wonderful artist. So we're in the Turkish baths, and there are all these people with these beauty masks on. And I get the text on my phone to write a Daredevil story, and I'm like, what if somebody used the beauty mask to trick surveillance? And what if it was Turk? You know, so, you know, and then Stefano Raphael did an amazing job on that story. It's just a treasure. I mean, it was really fun. So I'm talking to Marvel about some new stuff, but I'm not really supposed to talk about it yet.
Oh, yeah. We got to keep quiet about those things here.
No, nothing too exciting. Just maybe another one-shot thing.
You did do that Daredevil, or I'm sorry, Elektra 100, and as soon as I opened it up and I saw your name, I got excited. I was like, "Oh, it's Anne Nocenti and Elektra! That's awesome!" It was during Chip's run on Daredevil.
Oh, what story was that? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and that was fun because I was able to do a 2-parter. There was a Black, White, and Blood,
Yep.
and then there was, and so it was like a kind of what if Elektra had met Typhoid in an asylum, and I made Elektra kind of the big sister, and she was just sort of looked down at this kooky Mary Walker and was like, oh, you know, you're crazy, but you're talented. You got to get a handle on that. It's like this brief, and was able to do a little Easter egg of having her rip up some sheets that had blood on them, and that was like a homage to the future Elektra costume. And then it went on in the Typhoid and Elektra story. Who was the villain in that? I can't even remember.
That's found in the Daredevil. I'm sorry, Elektra, Woman Without Fear trade paper.
Oh yeah.
Dang it, I can't recall either. But it's in the. I remember it being in the back of the backup or the back of issue 100. And I thought that was
yeah.
This is something from Harry Wynn. And Nocenti, I got so excited when your Daredevil Omnibus Volume 1 got announced. Day one purchase. I can't wait to read your run for the very first time. And 40 years old.
Well, it's crazy. It's a crazy run. So hope it doesn't disturb you too much.
This is from Anne Nocenti's Legs. Thank you for this. We support you always. You just had to do that, didn't you? Oh,
that's hilarious. Yeah.
Apparently, there's a side of the internet that admires your legs from an
Hey,
interview.
I'll take it. I'm not going to Me Too that one. I'm going to take it.
This is a good question. What is your favorite Daredevil villain?
I mean, I'd have to think about that, but I think that each villain takes Daredevil to a different place. So, I mean, Typhoid, of course, I think got into his brain and was definitely, you know, Frank Miller established that Daredevil has a thing for crazy women. And it wasn't, you know, Karen Page wasn't crazy. She was just troubled. You know, during Frank's run, I guess she was a junkie, right? A prostitute and a junkie. So maybe it's more not necessarily a taste for crazy women, but a savior complex thing. That I also really enjoyed Bullet, who
Bullet.
was
John Romita Jr.
John Romita. So we it was sort of, how every era seems to have the thing it's terrified of, and like we have no idea what kind of amazing stories young people are going to write from having to go through the pandemic. I mean, what a weird thing to have to go through as a kid. They're going to be working that out for years and hopefully making great stories. But in the 80s, I was a kid where we were all scared of the Soviet America conflict and the possibility of a bomb dropping. So my generation, we grew up terrified of a nuclear winter, of how were you going to hide someplace from the nuclear fallout and not, die. And so Lance was a character who was a little kid who had an explosive father. His father was like literally a bomb. We called him Bullet. I don't know why we didn't call him the Bomb, but he was really explosive, and it doubled down on Lance's fear of a nuclear bomb dropping. And so he had a little like in the 80s, he had what do they call them now when people like dig bomb bunkers? And there's a name for preppers. He was like a prepper. Yeah. He was a prepper before there were preppers, this little kid Lance. And he's built this whole little prepper universe, and it's because he's afraid of his father blowing up. So that was a really fun villain.
Oh my goodness, so many good questions. Any more plans for independent work? I reread I reread Seeds frequently, and that is an excellent book.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about things. I don't know what I'm going to write yet. I'm kind of in summer vacation mode still.
Good for you. You have earned it. Any chance of doing a Power Pack series?
I love Power Pack. I think that they're really important characters, because whenever people come here and bring their kids, and the parents are like, hey, you write comics. Do you have anything you could give my kid? And I always think, I have never written a comic I could hand to a kid, because they're so racy and adult and grim and, scary. And so Power Pack, I've always wanted to like write a story I could hand to a kid without worrying about rotting their brain. And I always loved Power Pack. I think Wheezy came back and did with June Brigman, didn't they? Yeah.
Another one of those retro series, which I think is amazing. What was the first story you wrote that made you realize, yeah, I really like writing comics?
I think it was with Daredevil, because I had done a Bizarre Adventures was my first, and then I'd done a bunch of short things, and then Spider-Woman, I didn't, killing a character because the book was dying was not the most fun, and it was really Daredevil when Johnny and I really got into the swing of it, and we were like both just sparking with ideas. But I think also as an editor working with Chris, because we had a blast working on, and then the New Mutants, when we put Bill Sienkiewicz on the New Mutants, I think that was the moment, you really started to go, it's like comics. That was like bringing expressionism into comic books was a pretty radical moment in the history of comics. And suddenly there were like so many possibilities artistically and therefore story-wise, because of the way Bill was interpreting the New Mutants as like abstract expressionism sometimes, so that was a really exciting moment for me in comics.
Any favorite creative team-ups? I forgot the documentary. I remember seeing Anne Nocenti having a blast with Chris. Yeah, you two.
Yeah, Chris and I had a blast.
So close. Like,
and but it was really Wheezy. Like Wheezy set the stage for. I just watched her. I was her assistant for a year, and I just watched how she worked with Chris. And because it's interesting to be an editor. Sometimes the writer gives you a bunch of ideas that are quite they're not developed yet. And one of the things that you really need to do as an editor is pull out the whole idea rather than saying, nah, you know, you say, well, there's a germ of something here. Let's see if it's got legs. Let's see if it's got a plot. Let's see if the character really can, you know. So it's the skill is to not kill the writer's ideas, but to do the opposite, to nurture them and bring them out. And I think that when years later, when Marvel became more of a corporate entity, and there was this kind of like elevator pitch. What's your elevator pitch? You know, it felt like a lot of the finesse of realizing who your writer was, what do they have to say, how do I help them say it, is something that the old elevator pitch, you know, paradigm doesn't really have a lot of patience for. If that makes any sense.
It does. What did you watch any of the Daredevil? Like, do you know that Born Again is going to be on Disney Plus? But
I love the Daredevil series.
okay, you did. Okay.
Oh no, I love it. And in fact,
what did you think of Typhoid Mary showing up in? Well, she was in Iron Fist. Yeah.
I mean, I didn't really love their portrayal of Iron Fist. I felt like there was something, maybe he was too naive or not deep enough or something. I don't really remember what about it I didn't necessarily think nailed who he was. Danny Rand, right? Mm-hmm. But Iron Fist isn't a character I know that well. But no, I was really excited to see Typhoid show up, or Typhoid never showed up, right? Just Mary.
Well, she did in Iron Fist season 2.
Okay, yeah. There was Mary Walker, Typhoid, but they didn't get all the way to. Oh, I remember they didn't get all the way to Bloody Mary, or you know, because there's 4 personas. And yeah, no, I loved it, and I was at a Comic-Con and met the Daredevil actor, and Vince D'Onofrio.
Yeah,
I met them both, and you know, you're sort of like, they're not going to know me. And as soon as somebody introduced me and said my name, they were both like, "Oh my God, I'd love to talk to you. You created Typhoid Mary," and that's always like a thrill.
You know, you did, and you did so much more than that. I think like.
But it's a thrill to realize that the actors on the TV show are actually reading the comics, and that's really a respect thing. Like, even if they don't take anything from it or take little from it, it's the respect when an actor actually reads the comics that these things are based on. I don't know that all of them do, you know.
I know you have to get going, and most of this has been talking about, of course, Daredevil and your work at Marvel, but you've done quite a bit at DC as well. Like, you went on to do Catwoman and Green Arrow, Kid Eternity. Excellent. I really enjoyed that series.
I mean, a lot of my work is so wacky that I can't even believe it's just so wacky. Like, I don't really know. Like Kid Eternity, a lot of those stories you could never tell today because they're so bizarre, you know, and you'd never get that. But that's one of the great things. Like, Walt Simonson calls the 1980s the second golden age of comics, and it's when Frank Miller, Bill Sienkiewicz, Mike Kaluta, Barry Windsor, you know, Walt Simonson. Then there was like Neil Gaiman and Sandman and all the Brits, that Vertigo. And it was just a kind of renaissance of wacky creativity that predates the movies and the IP becoming valuable. Once the IP becomes valuable, there's a lot more control on what you can do with the characters. So a lot of those earlier stories you could never do today.
I I think it's interesting to go back and read a lot of these collected editions. But I mean, that what you just said goes for a lot of stories from those particular times you couldn't do today. Just like I'm sure today's stories you probably couldn't do in 20 years from now because things are always changing. Was there an X-Men story? It's my buddy Taylor Talks Comics. Was there an X-Men story you were an editor on that you had a big impact on the way Claremont told the story?
I mean, I again, memory is treacherous, so to try and remember is difficult. But I do believe that I had a big impact on putting Bill Sienkiewicz on the New Mutants and helping develop those stories in terms of like realizing that we could tell a different kind of story with Bill.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if Demon Bear or Legion or some of the stories we did would have worked without Bill. And yeah, I don't really remember. I mean, basically we'd go to lunch a lot, have story conferences, and then Chris would go home and write. And it's just sort of impossible to remember.
I love watching you and Wheezy and Chris interact. For people that haven't seen the X-Men Chris Claremont documentary, I think it's on Amazon. It's excellent.
Well, we tease Chris a little too much in that.
You think? Oh, not at all. I think you guys are great. I don't think Demon Bear would have been Demon Bear without that team. It would have that elevated that book to another level that just became such a iconic, epic event, like a story that to this day people are still talking about. The Demon Bear saga. Anytime you mention New Mutants, it's either Demon Bear saga or Cable, the formation of X-Force, things like that. How did you feel about Barry Windsor Smith finally publishing the Hulk story with Monsters?
Oh no, I love that. I mean, I was trying to remember. I kind of remember. Again, 40 years ago, I think it was in Al Milgram's office. I was working on Marvel Fanfare where I had done that Angel story, and Barry was telling a Hulk story, and it was genius. And my memory is that it was about a little kid who was trying to deal with his parents always fighting, and the Barry wanted realistic language, which included a lot of swear words. And Marvel, I think he was told, probably by Jim Shooter, that while everyone loved the concept of the story, that it would have to be told without such brutal language. Because I think at that time we were still under the comics code. And you know, in hindsight, we probably should have just said, let's publish this without the, you know, comics code sticker of approval. But on the other hand, it was a Marvel character. So could you really have like the F word over and over and over in a Marvel comic? And I think Barry just rightly decided the story couldn't be told without the brutality of the language he wanted to use. So he withdrew the story and finished it and then published it, which is just wonderful.
And let me just take one more question, because there is something else that people have been asking about, and I'm kind of curious too. Somebody was asking, and I don't know who it was because I cannot go back that far. If you based the Kingpin in your stories on anybody, like a real person at that time?
I don't remember. I mean, I think one of the things that you do when you're writing anything, because I've also written film and fiction and made movies, you try to find someone in your life that sort of approximates. And with him, I guess it would have been somebody in my life who I was scared of, or who just had that kind of violence right under their skin. So I don't remember anyone particular, but that's probably the kind of thing that I would have done.
And the last question I wanted to ask you, because a couple of people have asked, and I'm curious too, and I love asking this question. For any writer that is out there that's trying to get published, or just trying to find their voice, what kind of advice do you have?
I mean, it's a whole new ball game. You can no longer pick up a newspaper and get a bunch of writing jobs. So I don't really have, and especially with AI like developing, I mean, it's a frightening time for writers, I think. So most of the young writers that I know are doing Kickstarters and just doing it all on their own, not bothering to try and go through a regular publisher, and just getting their work out there by doing a Kickstarter and self-publishing. And for a while people were doing it online. There was a site called Activate for a while where people were doing strips, and there's a bunch of panel syndicate, I think, is another one that was doing like comics online. And I think it's like the way people make movies on their iPhones. It's, don't wait for your story to be approved by a publisher. Just make it and get it out there. That's what I would say.
And there you go.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, so much for being here. Thank you for the kind words. I want to thank Anne Nocenti for taking time out of her day to join us to talk about some of these stories, and some from 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Hard to remember.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Just want to thank everybody for watching, and hit that like button, and keep on reading those Anne Nocenti stories, and pre-order that Daredevil by Anne Nocenti Omnibus as well.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day, everybody. Stay healthy.